everybody. Welcome back to Your Full Crew. I am Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. I just want to remind you, if you like anything that you're hearing today, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on our YouTube or whatever channel that you're listening to us on, or viewing us, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc. I want to introduce our guest today. We have Ed Boucas is back. He was on Full Tilt. Ed, you want to give the audience a little bit of background on you?
Oh, hi, I'm Ed. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Votix. We are a software company for drones. I have 23 years. I have been in the tech industry for the last 23 years, from cybersecurity to now drones, and it's my pleasure to be here.
And we also have John McHale. So, John, you want to give us a intro into you?
Sure. I'm John McHale. I'm editorial director for Military Embedded Systems magazine. Been covering the defense industry from the electronics perspective for about 25 years, aerospace and defense as well. And I've also done a couple of joint events with Dawn and Small World. Dawn and I found out when we were working together that we were at college together a few decades ago. We'll just leave it at that.
University of Scranton, baby. Scranton, PA.
It's a small world, for certain. All right, so our first article is actually given us by Ed, and I really like this one. It's got a great title. So, Top Gun Maverick, thrilling but outdated by today's AI. So, what about this article interested you, Ed? And what does Top Gun get wrong?
No, the movie was amazing. Like, I think it was the best movie I've seen lately after COVID for sure. And it's an amazing movie, and I think the everybody loves it. But as we all know from the drone industry, like risking, I guess was like six people, right? Yeah, six people, their lives to do a mission that easily could be done by actual drones that are flying right now. Is was intriguing me. I remember I was watching it with my wife. I was mentioning that to her, and so does it, even though it's amazing history, is a romance, whatever, but doesn't make sense in the real world. And then I start studying about it after I watched the movie, and I was intrigued about it, right? So, and then I was reading a lot of articles, including this one, that is criticizing the movie in the sense that technology is out there, and you don't have to risk six people's lives to do the same thing. That and that was all about, the movie was all about how long they can do it, right? It started with 3 minutes, and he was able to do in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And I don't know if I'm spoiling it for somebody that haven't seen the movie yet, but you're gonna see it soon. And then I was reading an article that under 1 minute you can be doing with the drone that can fly almost 500 miles an hour, but taking more than 8 Gs. And they can do it more precisely, and you can send many drones without risking anyone's lives, and it's more efficient, right? And sometimes you can use kamikaze drones, right? That was my point there. Say, hey, how the world is changing, right? So I think, of course, you still need the pilots, but the pilots can be safe, can be remote, and you don't need, and remember about the cost of that as well, right? You have a very expensive airplane, and if you look into the cost of the airplane and the payload of the airplane, just to make the pilot safe, you have a lot of payload, not only the pilot's payload, but all the safety features around the pilot as well, that generates additional payload and additional cost, right? So if you remove that that component, you not only have a cheaper solution, but a lighter solution that can fly above limits, right? So that was my point there. Everybody from the industry that pretty much watched the movie, I'm pretty sure they had the same feeling. Hey, but why is that? They mentioned that at the beginning of the movie because I was reading that about it, a lot of articles, right? And they're saying that when they're about to launch, because they made this movie in 2019 when they produce it and they film it, and they were supposed to be launching it during COVID, and then COVID hit, and then they postponed it for now. And then Tom Cruise was doing his research and talk about a lot. That's why in the beginning they introduced the drone thing and the money moving
To the drones. Yeah, that's right.
vehicles, and they mentioned that because they did the research and people were already talking to him. Hey, the storytelling is amazing, but it doesn't make much sense. So he kind of tweaked a little bit, but he couldn't change it. Otherwise, it's not Top Gun, right? He's gonna have to call it something different.
Exactly.
But it's amazing. And then when you do the research, you're gonna see there's like more than 3 models right now within the Navy that could have been doing that. And
Wow.
under that time limit, and they did some simulations. They did like some simulations to see using the same track, doing the same mission with a drone. They do under a minute, very precisely and all this. So it's amazing how things change, right? From Top Gun 1, even from Top Gun 2 when they filmed that in 2019.
Yeah, I would love to get John's perspective on this. John, first of all, John, did you see the movie?
I did, and I watched the original one 2 days before just to catch me up.
You almost have to, right? You got to like watch the original Top Gun, then go right to the movies and see the next one to kind of get some of the differences and a lot of the continuity.
Well, that came out when we were teenagers, so we all know that. We can quote that movie by heart. But it's funny when he was talking about all the things that drones can do that humans can't. And I thought about what Top Gun is too. It occurred to me they used to say the same things about NASA. Why don't we just send robots to do all these missions? Why do we keep sending humans? Because NASA needs funding and it's good PR to have humans be heroes, right? And so, and let's not. It made Tom Cruise a lot of money, but it's a heck of a lot of good PR for the U.S. Navy. This Top Gun movie. So, but he's 100% right. It was kind of cool to show how they showed all the technology. I know Lockheed Martin fans were very thrilled to see their logo on the joystick in the aircraft. So like, oh, look at that.
See, these are the things you noticed, John. I didn't even notice that.
Because I've been reading about it. I'm connected to a lot of folks, and they're pushing it on the PR side, and they're pushing that out a lot. But Dawn, I'll push back to you. You're an Air Force veteran, right? And I know the Air Force was not a big fan of the word unmanned systems. They preferred remotely piloted aircraft because they want to have that human in the loop. And I think just having a totally autonomous AI aircraft flying in that mission and doing it without a human in the loop, I think you kind of lose something there. So I think you want to make sure that there are humans behind it. And that also pushes into commercial world too, right? That's what the big thing is. How many humans really want to get on a passenger jet with nobody with gray hair behind the wheel, so to speak? So I think from a technology perspective, it was very cool. And some of it was probably a stretch, but that's what we call movie making. But there are the abilities of unmanned aircraft and what they can do is unbelievable. And it's also what they can do. And that's a large aircraft. It's the small aircraft that are really driving innovation right now. So
that's a whole.
How does the Air Force feel about this? You ever talk to them?
Well, John, actually, and Ed, both of you, I like the article. I thought the catchy title, when you think about branding, for sure, gets your attention and makes you want to read it. And, as I'm reading it, it wasn't really anything new to me, right? Because we're all involved in this industry. But one thing they got completely wrong, and I'm going to quote out of the article, it says, these drones, quote, controlled by artificial intelligence without human oversight. And to John's point, that is not true, right? So, Ed, when you were talking about it's a movie and how could it be a real Top Gun movie without Tom Cruise in that fighter jet, right? I agree with you. I can't imagine him sitting back in a remote ops center with a joystick, right, flying a drone through this mission. But that is the reality of what is happening today. Right, in a lot of locations, the Air Force has been, and John, you know this too. And Mike, the Air Force has been doing remotely piloted operations for years, and they are absolutely as human oversight. They have remote pilots. Like, there's no 100% autonomous missions to my knowledge. And I've been out for a little while. Just really since a year and a half. But the Department of Defense in particular has been very forward-leaning when it comes to artificial intelligence policy. One of the first groups to put out, even before private industry did, policy guidelines, and they have regulations on this as well. So all of these aircraft, to the extent that they're used as a weapon under the law of war, have to undergo weapons review. Under the Geneva and other relevant conventions and other relevant treaties. Actually, it wouldn't be Geneva. It would be, I was just thinking about Dick Jackson the other day from the Army. He's like our law of war guru. He's been retired for a bit. But the treaty is not coming to mind, but it's the one that governs means and methods of warfare. Hague. The Hague Conventions. There you go. Light bulb came back on. So bottom line is, drones are amazing. I think it would have been a totally different Top Gun movie for him to be sitting in a trailer at Creech Air Force Base with a joystick. Although, you know what? That would have been reality, honestly. Probably more realistic than what we did see in that movie. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, I don't think we could do another Top Gun movie. I think we're reaching the limits where the next one would be absurd, right?
And Tom Cruise will be too old if they wait another 20 years.
Well, he
Even if
seems not to age. He'll be doing Mission Impossible
They
12.
do not do the beach scene anymore, right? Now that was not beach. The last one was football on the beach, right? So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. In terms of movie making, I think, you know, you gotta have something that's interesting and that requires people, you know. But I think the movie about the chain of authorization is a different movie, right? And I think
it was a movie, Mike. It was called Eye in the Sky, and you know, it was Helen Mirren was in that one, about a remote operation overseas where it was all about a drone operation, and then the struggles that not only the chain of command but the pilots sitting in that box at Creech went through. So that movie's been done.
Right, but that's a very different tone if I'm picking up on it correctly, right? And I think that actually does reflect more accurately what goes on in the minds of the people that actually have to execute these missions now. It's a very different consideration than, let's say, 80s America fighting the Russians in the sky, right? Dogfighting. It's a very, very different circumstance. So I think it's a great thing that Ed kind of brought it up, because it was my gut instinct immediately when I heard that they were still making this movie post-pandemic. You know, it's like, this is not what the Air Force is about anymore, or how these missions are run. So I have not seen the movie.
Can I say one more thing about it, though?
What?
Mike, can I say one more thing about it?
Sure.
I do have to give them props for finally updating, you know, at the very beginning of the movie where they talk about Miramar and what the Top Gun school is. They finally added "and women," the nation's, you know, finest men and women, because like John, I had watched the other one.
It wasn't in the first movie,
It
which
wasn't
you
in the
noticed
first
right away.
movie. Just the men got to go, and I was like, "Yay!" And of course, I noticed that right away. So
some signs of progress.
Speaking of 80s movies, you know, remember the Bonnie Tyler song "I Need a Hero"? Well, that's what people come to the movies for. They want to have a hero. And
now they got Lady Gaga. So I mean, that music, woo, that was unbelievable.
While it was the U.S. Navy, and I've met a few Top Gun pilots, they are very confident individuals, man or woman. So
yes.
and they come across that way. And someone said to me, one thing they liked better about the second movie is that Tom Cruise wasn't as cocky. And I said, well, that's because he's pushing 60. But it was. But I think that's an important aspect, and I think even if you have the remotely piloted aircraft, you're going to focus on the humans, not on the aircraft. The aircraft's not going to be your hero; it's going to be the person. So,
absolutely.
But yes, the technology will be used more and more. But I think there's always going to be a human in the loop, and there will always be fighter pilots, some way.
Yeah.
Just to add to my initial comment as well, Don, and I was listening to what you were saying. If you look into the mission, the way it was created, it was very robotic. By concept, you have to fly that out to exactly. Otherwise, of course, you can have missiles pointing at you. You have to find that speed. You have to make that time, and you have to drop it. So it was very mechanical. So again, you don't need much AI to do that. It's kind of a mission, very clear that what you have to do is a go-to mission. What you have to do. So creating a path to that and doing that. You don't need to take a lot of decisions and you don't have the time. If you look at the pilots, they were kind of little robots doing that mission, right? They had to compile, like to do exactly that time, that speed, you know, within that time period and dropping that moment and then 8G up at almost 10 Gs. So it was very mechanical and again, it was I was relating to when you create a drone mission. It was very similar to creating a drone mission in the way you create the path. So you don't need much AI to do that, and not even a remote. Honestly, to do that mission specifically, you don't need any pilot remote. You can upload the mission into the controller, and they could fly offline easily, right?
What about when something goes wrong? Something
That's the
always
good
goes
thing
wrong.
about not having people's lives over there. You can send 20 drones,
Yeah, but
right?
you still might need a pilot or someone remotely
No,
piloting
you're
the
gonna.
aircraft to make
No.
adjustments.
Surely you need it. But the way the mission was created for such a short period of time, you can
Yeah.
supervise it for sure. But you don't even have time to do that, right? If you do under 1 minute, for example, that's what a drone can do and safely do it.
Oh, I agree, and that's where the stretch was.
That's because drones, you don't have to think about of the dogfight, right? So that small period, the more mechanical you do, more chances of success, right? You want to do something, and again, and that's machine has a advantage against us, right? They can take if it's preloaded, if it's predefined, which is not general AI, specific AI, they do better than any human.
Well, and
So
Ed,
Yeah,
you talked about the dogfight. Even in your article, it mentions that DARPA exercise where they put a pilot up against AI, and the AI won those dogfights every time. So, even in that aspect of the mission could be better. Hey, Mike, I'm seeing some things in the chat, but they're too
Yep.
tiny for me to read. I didn't know if you want to do a couple
Yeah,
shout outs real
I
quick.
was trying to stick them in because there's some good ones here. So we got Kevin Sanders, friend of the show. Got excited seeing the old school startup of the F-14. Oh, the memories using ground equipment for startup. We got
Kevin's retired Air Force, by the way.
yeah, so he lived it firsthand, a real Top Gun. So Votix, the great panel we have here today. So we got Ed's team in there. Tony Drummond, great discussion. Lots of movies to watch now, and Kevin's got some recommendations here. Good Kill is another good film to watch, and that is starring Ethan Hawke. So that catches us up on the chat.
All
Um,
right.
so let's actually go into some real use of technology, military UAV technology. Thank you, John, for finding this article. So unmanned,
Actually, for publishing it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So unmanned ISR payloads leverage MOSA design. So for people who don't understand acronyms, let's sum this up by saying MOSA means modular design. So open standards, which we're very familiar with in the commercial space after having PX4 and Ramon come on the podcast. So you want to dive into this a little bit, John? We
You're
lost
muted,
your
John.
audio. Okay.
I'm
Oh, there
back.
he goes.
I apologize
Yay, he's
for
back.
over the mute button. So MOSA actually stands for Modular Open Systems Approach, and it comes out of a mandate from the Tri-Services that are called they call it in our world they call it the Tri-Service Memo, which basically mandated going forward that all military systems and upgrades and designs leverage an open architecture approach and open standards. They call it a warfighting imperative because to keep up with constantly changing and more complex threats from adversaries, you need to get technology into the hands of warfighters more quickly. Now, everyone knows the defense acquisition process can be termed glacial at times, and that has not changed. It's getting a little faster. You have different, I'm going to get into the weeds here a bit, but you have different items that allow you to get around that. There's always the small business innovative research contracts, which aren't as quick as you may think. More popular are other transaction authorities. Also, what the Defense Innovation Unit does, as Dawn and I know, we both worked with those folks, especially on their Blue UAS program, where they take in technology from the commercial world and try and get it to military, basically prototype it, get it into military warfighters' hands more quickly. And also the Special Ops community has SOFWORKS, which is Special Operations Forces Works. It's a prototyping to get hands into the operators more quickly. But this article here, we kind of dive into more on how MOSA is impacting unmanned systems. And where MOSA comes in here, it's basically around an initiative called the Sensor Open Systems Architecture Technical Standard, which has been around for a few years, a little longer than the mandate, but it's basically looking to bring more commonality to sensor designs and so that they can be more interoperable no matter when you go from one platform to another. And this where that comes into play is on these payloads, because it's impacting electronic warfare, radar designs. Now there are some, and that means more open standards like VPX, and that's a computing standard, and it also means more commercial off-the-shelf technology, or COTS. COTS was another DoD mandate made famous in 1994 by then Secretary William Perry, basically in reaction to all the bad press they got over $400 hammers and $3,000 toilet seats. and such, but people would put mil spec on something and they felt they could charge whatever they wanted to. And when that first came out, cost was a 4-letter word, kind of like MOSA, but because it was commercial, people thought commercial meant cheap, meant Radio Shack. May you Radio Shack rest in peace. But it balanced the way it's a military procurement term, and it's also going to come along with more MOSA. Now, MOSA is not a panacea. There are still those very classified, very closed programs that might have open architectures, but they're all classified, or they might have to be custom designed from scratch. But a lot of your power integrated circuits for very specialty programs are still there. But MOSA is the way it's going. I attended an event, and Emma does nice. Emma was one of our writers. She does a nice job bringing together a lot of folks and what their designers are doing. But it's really what's driving this. People ask, why MOSA, why SOSA, why should I do it? I said, because your customer wants it. The DoD is pushing it big time. I see more enthusiasm than I've seen with similar approaches over the last 25 years. And I would also say that I asked a question of a guy from the Rapid Equipment Office at an event, and he said, well, it's a tough business paradigm for people stuck in the 20th century. And he was referring to the primes in some level. He goes, but because they see that if all this open architecture, they're going to lose their secret sauce, so to speak. But yet, in the long run, they're going to be fine because everything's going to be interoperable. They're going to get more business. He goes, but there's some folks on the DoD who are not accepting of it either. But they are moving forward, and it is happening, and you're seeing it in requirements. And you'll continue to see it there, and that's how it applies to unmanned systems, is to get that technology more quickly into the field. And Dawn recently wrote an article for us, too, which talks about how in the war in Ukraine is seeing some commercial drone tech being leveraged more quickly to the battlefield, going around traditional DoD acquisition processes. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to get Ed's thoughts on this, because this is really his bread and butter. I mean, John, you may not know, and for those that don't know about Ed, Mike mentioned this in the beginning, go back to fullcrew.io and check out his Full Tilt episode, because he talks all about his background and how he created Cypher and BitBlock. And, Ed, my question to you is, so many people are worried about proprietary information. I mean, it's a real stumbling block in collaboration and moving industries forward. And to John's point, on the DoD side, people concerned about, my secret sauce. What are your thoughts about, this open source and in particular MOSA, and how it can still really uplift the whole industry, but you can still have your secret sauce on the side?
Yeah, because you have two layers, right? You have open architecture and framework and open source, right? Open source, you go even deeper on the open context, right? But let's give I always like to give real examples, right? Compare iPhone to BlackBerry, right? BlackBerry died. They tried to keep everything proprietary. They didn't open it, and they didn't create an ecosystem around them. They did not create collaboration, and they died because they couldn't innovate, right? On the other hand, you have Google with Android and Google Apps, and you have Apple with all the collaboration where you can create your apps on top of their operating system, and then you create innovation, right? But it's still very safe. It's still very safe architecture. Like nowadays, iPhone is as secure as BlackBerry was at back then, right? In a similar level, right? So you don't need to be. That's what we call like security by
obscurity. Security by obscurity.
Yeah, security by obscurity. So that's not very smart, because once they understand your obscurity, you're done anyways, right? So I don't believe in the concept of security by obscurity. You can be very secure if you look into the cryptography, right? Everybody uses the same cryptography standard, right? So and it's pretty safe, right? When you do an online transaction, e-commerce, or even military grade cryptography, right?
Yeah, usually SHA-256. Yeah, it's pretty common standard.
512, or depending if it's public key infrastructure or not, whatever. So I think that the fact that you create an open environment, you allow collaboration, which expedites innovation. So there's no way you can create innovation if you're not able to take advantage of what somebody already did, right? Somebody did, and you add into it, just like science, right?
Yep.
Every theory goes on adding layers to a theory that you had before, right? And again, I think the example between an iPhone and BlackBerry is perfect, because BlackBerry tried to make everything proprietary, everything closed, and died, just like when Sony came up with a camera, right? With a analog camera, which they tried to make their protocol proprietary, and they died, and people create an open standard and survive, right? So and thrived. So I think my video got a little worse now.
It is.
No, I
So
think you're looking good. Mike, I was going to throw out to Mike this. Mike, I hope Ramon's listening, because it makes me wonder and scratch my head why there aren't more military people at the Open Source Summit and even the PX, right, Developer Summit, because it seems to me these MOSA types would be well served to be talking to the commercial types and having that conversation.
Well, they're there, and some of them might be unannounced too, right? So there's still, I think, a conversation, and I'm not as embedded in the military as John or you, but there's a conversation to what extent do you adopt open source, because you're giving up an asymmetrical information advantage. And to Ed's point, actually to everyone's point, the military has noticed there is a weakness in basically, all right, we're locked into Lockheed for this one type of part for over a decade before the other team is able to backwards engineer it. That's not necessarily good for growth, right? Or advancing the technology fast enough where you actually do have an asymmetrical battlefield advantage. So one of the things that has to be realized is the base level technology of chips and boards, that hardware, flight controllers, for example, is getting to a point where you have to think of it more like the screw you'd see for, a car door. Like, that has a standard, there's a standards body that controls it. You build to that standard, and that allows us to build unique doors on top of that, right? Or unique cars on top of that. So that's kind of where we're getting to with what used to be computing technology, a supreme advantage to have, a completely proprietary built-to-task device. Now computing itself is and software is so pervasive that you're giving up the market advantages of being able to rapidly develop actually more rugged systems that are tested against hundreds of developers in an open source environment, or even the top 100 in the world in kind of programs that are allowing, let's say, just the military vendors to have all a go at it with like an open a standardized connector that you all have to use this connector. What can you build on top of it that gives us cool features that we actually want to purchase from you?
Yeah, but one thing we have to highlight, sorry to interrupt you, there's a huge difference. There's a big difference between open system and open source.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that you mentioned open source, and I think the article is referring to open systems.
Open standard, yeah, but hardware standards,
so
yeah.
Open source, you're giving away your source code,
Mm-hmm.
and people can, depending on how the licensing of it, FreeBSD, whatever, you can just use and copy and paste that source code and reuse and enhance, and that's one way of seeing that. But you have an open system, which allows, as mentioned before, interoperation. You standardize components so you can work different components to the same core system. So there's both of them enhance collaboration, which I think is the core, but there's two levels. One is open source, going to the source code. The other one is an open system that you're pretty much standardizing in how people should be done. So components can work different ways, so you can plug in different components to core systems. And I think that's what most of the defense is going to, right?
That's a great.
I'd kind of dive in to response to both of you right there. The reason you don't see a lot of people at open source maybe is as Ed said, there's still a lot of folks in the military community that like the phrase open source. They see security risk. It's the first thing that pops into their head. They use a lot of open source stuff. I mean, years ago they were prototyping like hell in Linux back when it came out. But when it comes to open standards, yes, the hardware is becoming a commodity in some levels, as Michael said, but not completely. Some of the standardization within SOSA and these folks are getting very specific for very specific programs. And they also have security built in and trusted computing. A big thing for the military right now, especially with the overwhelming threat of geopolitics and what could happen in Taiwan. They're trying to onshore a lot of this stuff and build a trusted supply chain all the way from the chip level to the system. And so that factors in too. So there is still some proprietary stuff going on. And and in the article itself, there's a quote from Giorgio Bortoli, who's the Assistant Director for Spectrum Dominance and Intelligence within the U.S. Army, C5ISR Center, and he says, the big where there's a real standardization that still needs to be done is for small unmanned aircraft platform, which goes back to the theme of this podcast. And the Army, he says, is very big on UASs. It's from Category 5 to Category 1, but you cannot fit a lot of these current standards on anything below Category 3. So a lot of that standardization work is still going on, and while there's still some commoditization, and where I would take that more of a macro level, where I think take what Michael said to a macro level, is the military used to be the driver of innovation and growth. Now they are still somewhat, but a lot of times they're a customer like the rest of us, but they do have extra protocols and extra securities, as Ed said. So, and they are a slow-moving behemoth. So we'll see how that goes.
And just to my point before, if you look into Apple, for example, they don't use open source, they operate system, right? So they can collaborate, use the same protocols, so you can create innovation and connect to the ecosystem. And you still expedite innovation without having to open your source, because open up your source allow people maybe to find ways of finding security breach, security vulnerabilities much easier, right? So the source code and everything, even though, again, I don't believe in security by obscurity, but still it's easy for you to find any problem in your source code if you have the source code itself, and you can find problems which are vulnerabilities in your code, right? So, but it's still open system is you still have not an open source, but a collaborative environment that allows innovation.
And speaking of collaboration, I see more people beaming into our chat, Mike.
Yeah, well, we just have a comment from Sam Scully. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. So glad to start my morning off with brilliance. So thank you, Sam. I hope that applies to all of us.
Very, very cool. John, you mentioned, DIU, you mentioned SoftWorks. I want to give a little shout out to AFWorks, right? The Air Force's Innovation Hub. They've been doing incredible things, including with advanced air mobility, which is probably a great segue to our next article, Mike.
Yeah, actually, if we could just take a break, quick break to thank everybody who's sponsored. So we have the Drone Code Foundation, ISR Ideas, which was kicked off by General Paz, our first sponsor. Thank you again. Ed from Votix here. He's also sponsored this podcast. And let's see, who am I forgetting? Oh, Dragonfly, we're going to have Cam Shell on tomorrow on the Full Tilt podcast. So thank you all for sponsoring the Full Crew podcast. And next up, we have something from you, Dawn. And I'm kind of excited about this because it's one of my hobby horses, AAM and noise. So what is this article about?
Yeah, I geeked out a little bit on this one. So this is from eVTOL magazine, and they're talking here about a NASA Joby collaboration to really do the first ever acoustics on eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, using Joby's prototype vehicle, a full-size pre-production prototype vehicle. And so they started this testing a little ways back, September 2021. They were doing these, and by the way, the article, I highly commend it to you if you want to learn more about acoustics and all the different microphones and how they placed them and all the different flight profiles they used for this thing. Super elaborate, as you can imagine. Coming from NASA. And what they did was they had enough weight on this uncrewed vehicle. They used an uncrewed prototype to simulate a pilot and 4 passengers on board at all different kinds of flight profiles. So they're doing this work back in the fall. In May of this year, right after AUVSI Exponential, Joby released their preliminary results, which were pretty impressive, frankly. I think the quote in the article was, barely perceptible against the city's ambient environment. So probably no shock to everybody. In cruise altitude and cruise mode, the vehicle was registering less decibels or less sound than it was during their landing and takeoff profiles. And we're talking altitudes of up to 1,640 feet. This thing was flying at a speed of 100 knots. So no joke, they were really testing this thing as if it were a real mission with passengers and a pilot on board. I found two things very interesting about this article, Mike. The first was that even in the loudest profile, they found that it was consistent, and this is the quote, of a normal conversation or a bustling office, business office, and registered less decibels than the average vacuum cleaner. So that was even during takeoff and landing. And I think that's pretty significant. The second thing is I learned something other than these cool facts about these flights. I learned something about acoustics. I didn't recognize that there was a difference between decibel levels and tonal content. Now, decibel levels is kind of that amount of noise that you're going to hear. The tonal content is more of like what it sounds like. And frankly, when you think about public perception and noise, it's what's that noise sound like is actually a little bit more important sometimes to the public. And is it more grating? Is it a really annoying sound? And for all those dronies out there, what they said was that while the Joby aircraft created a 65 decibels on approach, the benign nature of the sound, as opposed to the sound of rotors or the whine of a drone, can be perceived as less annoying to those on the ground. And so basically they're saying, the tone of the sound coming from the vehicle is highly relevant when you think about public acceptance, public perception. And what they're finding, at least with this particular aircraft, is it's more palatable than a drone. And there's more tests on the way. So they're going to test Whisk, a bunch of different designs with Whisk Aero and a bunch of other manufacturers down the pike.
Yeah, well, in terms of sound, the annoyance is coming from probably either the mid-register or the high register, which is why you immediately understood what whine of a drone meant, right? So this is, I think, a bigger issue than is talked about usually in the news when they're talking about air taxis excitedly. If we're creating a permanent dubstep concert in the sky, I don't think that this will be an accepted technology, especially when, even though I've heard some good news from Kitty Hawk in terms of where they could actually get the price for one of these, let's call them voyages, it's still probably only going to be used by relatively wealthy people at the onset, right? So those don't generally ingratiate the public. Very, very noisy rich people in the sky, right? Whining, no less. But I think it's important that this actually is a focus for this technology in terms of even comparing to our current available air travel, commercial air travel technology, and how relatively noisy and disruptive it is. Everybody has heard a plane come over them, at one point in their lives. Imagine living next to an airport, and there's a reason that property is priced as it is, right? So, or there's concessions you have to make. And it's not like we could do with highways where we could actually put up sound barriers, right? So this, I think it's important if this industry, AAM, is ever going to actually scale into a real industry rather than just kind of the flying car excited idea that you might see on a tech blog.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, John, what are your thoughts on this?
First thing that came into my mind when I read the article was they're testing a lot of this outside in very open air situations. But I remember watching a demo video of what one of the Bell's eVTOL would look like, and it was flying through the city. I said, so that's going to create a whole different noise level, and I don't know what the standards are for an aircraft flying between buildings, because then you have people in the buildings. If it's as loud as a helicopter, that's going to create a problem. What are the decibel levels? And I recently watched some 60 Minutes thing on all the different, and how some are different quieter than others. They were all very impressed by it. And a lot of these things are all prototyped as unmanned systems first. So, and I can even see where they might be unmanned systems all the time. Flying between buildings all day long might be a stressful job for a pilot too. but I don't know if there are noise standards for aircraft, if the FAA even set them for flying between buildings. And also this could apply to these type of aircraft for the military. They're going to want a much quieter aircraft if they're flying into the smaller the aircraft, the more quiet they're going to want to be because they're probably doing some form of stealth mode. So that's what popped into my head when I read it. How much loud is it going to be if I'm looking out my window right now and there's a drone flying by, right?
Yeah, just a historical note. There used to be more helicopter travel in New York City, and it was actually regulated to the level or capacity it is now because of the noise complaints. Especially since most of them were coming into Wall Street, where most of the people who had power to complain were complaining, even though they were the ones using it, ironically enough. So,
would you do a party for rich people in the sky?
Yeah, permanent dubstep concert. Yeah. So, what's your comment, Ed?
Now, my point is that we have some paradoxes, right, in the drone industry, and I think that's another one. I think if you look into the paradoxes that we have when you talk about autonomous or automation with drones is one of the paradox. Hey, like was mentioned before, I believe the pilot is going to always be there flying. Some people believe not, right? So you have some paradoxes there. And I think the noise is another paradox, right? You think about drones, think about the noise. But the way I see is that one of the paradoxes in technology evolves so fast and human beings are so creative that I don't see I see honestly, I really see, I'm optimistic, right? Otherwise I wouldn't be a entrepreneur for such a young age. So I started when I was 22, as you guys heard before, probably. So I think it's just momentarily in the difference between the drone and the helicopter or small airplanes is that it's still an open structure architecture, right? In the sense that it's still building, it's still evolving a lot, it's still open, and there's a lot of that has to be done in terms of flexibility of changing design, changing motors and all this. So for me, is something that is a paradox, which means that when you think about drones, you think about something noisy. When you talk about silent drones, it's a contradiction, right? And but I think it's a matter of time when you can surely. You're comparing yourself against helicopters. It's easy. It's an easy win, right? So
yeah.
And I have to disagree with you. These rich people flying. I talk about moving supplies around. You're talking about even moving people that need very quick assistance around. You think about moving, medical equipment and heart transplants and all this around very quickly, right? Which is the best use, right? More than even flying people around, right?
Or even at search and rescue missions where you can put a person in that vehicle and whisk them out off the side of a very high, a 14 or a high mountain.
And you have natural disasters, right? Floods, and you have hurricanes, you have tornadoes, and that's what. So I think it's a paradox that will be solved the same way when we talk about autonomous flights or flight automation, right? Of drones. I think it's the same in the same sense that it's a matter of time for us to solve it. I think is an open architecture, open design that can evolve much faster than a helicopter can change now, because of the level of regulation that is out there for helicopters and or airplanes. So I think it's easier to be solved with drones than in the other side. And again, the benchmark is so easy to beat, right?
Helicopters are pretty disruptive,
noisy, and people are flying hearts and like people that need transplants and need to get out there very quickly in the human areas in a very noisy environments. So I think that it's about time, and people are keen to make it happen. And human beings are very creative, and technology moves so fast that I think that will be the past when you look 2 years in the future, or maybe 5.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that at least the drone companies, I'm not seeing this on the AAM side, the drone companies that are mimicking nature, by this biomimicry, concept where, as an example, Eurolink has the beluga drone. I mean, it looks like a cute little whale, but that's not the point. The rotors, they've designed them based on owl wings. So they are pretty silent, actually. So really interesting, like why people aren't talking to Eurolink, why Joby isn't talking to them about their wing design, because, owls fly. You can't hear them. They're predators. They fly at night. they swoop down. Nobody can hear now until they hoot. So, I mean, there's I think some great things in nature to mimic there.
Yeah, so there's one of the things that I think we're conflating small drones with these large AAM on one
Oh
side
yeah, these are big ones.
is physics. So you
Yeah.
start to get into cubed laws where it's harder to control, like noise for one thing. Suddenly, a wingspan would actually sound like a huge bass wub.
Mm.
But that aside, to Ed's point, uh, the innovation hasn't even started on this front yet, and this is actually just the moment where people are recognizing where this is something we have to solve in order to perpetuate this technology that we've already started to build for. And so that's why I think this article is important, because it's going to bring us to that next level. On the point about, it would be used for transferring organs, middle mile delivery, you're actually probably going to see AAM, despite what initial venture capital storytelling was about. It's going to be on middle mile delivery or some other kind of established corridor like that. And then also on those corridors, the noise equation is different. It might just be a negotiation with that local population, because we're going back and forth between the same place. So the big concern, though, that I was talking about is if you're pulling a whole bunch of people from where I live on Long Island into the city via AAM, suddenly you're just creating a whole bunch of air traffic that's creating a lot of noise. That's not actually going to be a big or good PR move for the technology to get established. You'll actually kill the ramp that we have to develop noise canceling and other technologies that allow us to scale to that level later. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, traffic problems never get solved. They just create more traffic problems sometimes.
Yeah, in the sky instead of on the ground.
Yeah. So
Now you've got two jams.
I just want to hop on something Michael said. From a military standpoint, one of the use cases I would say is, for logistic support, kind of the way Michael described it would be a common military use, but for tactical, it's going to have to be super quiet and super reliable. And I don't know that we're there yet for that. But also, I would talk about why don't companies talk to other companies about stuff? Because they don't want to. They want to be the first. It's not always, it's self-limiting, but it's also self-protective. If you think about it, you look back to, you guys have ever spent time reading histories of the auto industry. I have, because it's kind of fascinating, all the personalities involved. But all these different quirky companies and everything popped up, and I'm seeing, obviously it's 100 years later, 150 years later, but I'm still seeing a lot more of that with the car. If just watching these different eVTOL companies, there's a bunch of them at the Farnborough Air Show I was reading about, and it's all like, it reminds me of when there were all these little small manufacturers of cars back in the early days, and then they all got swept up eventually by the big three and things. But I think we're in a similar Wild West when it comes to that, although with more laws and more stuff.
Yeah, well, Lorenz from Otirian, founder of PX4, he generally brings up an example of the auto industry prior to hardware standards being established. Was these little like pop-up garages. There was something like thousands of people who built cars over the course of the United States, and that eventually gets consolidated into a few companies. But those few companies are now making these beautiful cars you see in the 50s with all, the designs and structure that a single person wouldn't have been able to hammer out, if we're being honest, right? So that is, I think, the story of the drone industry, and a great observation, John. We're going to hop over to our last article, and surprise, because I haven't told anybody what we're going with. We're going to go with FaZe Clan goes public in a $725 million SPAC deal. I was surprised to see this, just because SPACs, if people don't understand them, are an investment vehicle. It's like going public without going public because a couple of people vouched for you. That's a gross simplification. But I just see this as a negative trend that after basically financial kind of turmoil in the markets, that we're still kind of seeing a lot of interest in backing these things, which have an absolutely terrible record for in terms of actually delivering once they go public. So
Hey, Mike, could you give people context? This is really way out. This is, really a whole different kind of tech, and what FaZe Clan is, what they're making, and these people on the picture, they look about 10 years old. So can you tell us like what we're talking about here?
yeah, so that's kind of the issue here is this is for esports, which as an industry is not necessarily a negative thing in any light. I mean, it's been on the rise and continuing to rise as a replacement for actually traditional sports viewership. The issue being is that there's actually controversy around FaZe Clan here and their contracts with individuals, things backfiring left and right, but yet they're still going to use this SPAC vehicle to gain extra public investment. So
And so they create they create online esport video games like Fortnite, like
no, they don't do any of that. They're just an esports kind of team.
Oh, they're a team?
They're just like a brand, and that's kind of my concern here is how do you get something that is so inconsequential in terms of like what you could hold on to? This is almost just a marketing vehicle, and good marketing can last for so long, but it's just a fad. So how does that get to a
Are they
public
just a
market?
streamer of other people's content? Is that essentially what they are?
Oh, okay. I see, Mike. I didn't even get this. I read your article, but it didn't phase me. No pun intended there. Where so they are a lifestyle gaming brand
Right.
that has that sponsors 11 competitive sports teams, esports, like Fortnite sports teams. And so they create streamers, content, so merchandise, things like this.
Right, so it's
So
not
they're
necessarily to be negative against lifestyle stuff because, there's plenty of other lifestyle brands out there, except that they went through the trials and tribulations of building their brands where it was actually a valid company to take IPO. So it seems like SPACs are digging deeper and deeper into the hole of let's just make up some crap to get this out there. Ed, any comments here?
No, I was reading the article while I was speaking because you just came up with it. We didn't know about it before. They have 500 million of followers if you combine YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch.
Twitch,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, that's even news for me. So they create content, right? So they make money through these platforms. They pay them the more they stream, right? And also, of course, they leverage the fact they are very good gamers and they go and participate in gaming challenges and win it. And at the same time, they stream to little kids that want to play that game. And so pretty much they do online content and that's how they make money. But I think the point here is the SPAC or is there, I think it's SPAC is the point, right?
Yeah.
Special purpose acquisition company,
Like,
right?
would this even be on the public market if it wasn't for the SPAC? And at that point, like...
Yeah. SPAC right now, SPAC was very hot 2 years ago, and people are doing a lot of SPACs. They lost a lot of value, and there was a lot of criticism about them because they're pretty much, it's what they call the blank check company, right? So you give them a blank check and they can buy whatever they want, right? It's crazy, right? So you go public, you raise money, $100 billion, and you have a blank check which you can buy any other company. In that case, they bought FaZe, right? So your FaZe is going public much quicker because they don't have to convince the market, just have to convince the SPAC manager, right? Mm-hmm. And the SPAC gets a cut on the equity, right? So the SPAC manager. So I think SPAC was very hot 2 years ago, and it's not as hot as it used to be because a lot of the companies they bankrupt or they went down or they're worth almost zero now. But that's a vehicle, right? SPAC is a vehicle where you can go public much quicker because again, somebody already listed, did the whole work of listing, and they're just buying your company, and then your company automatically is listed, right? So you don't have to go through all the process of getting listed. So according to their business model, again, they are making money. They get revenue from YouTube for being a huge platform and creating content and streaming that. So I'm not going to that if it's worth $725 million or not. I think the fact they use SPAC I think for them is a very new business model. So SPAC is good for a business model that people will not understand, because when you do an IPO, you have to convince a lot of bankers, right?
Right.
You have to do your roadshow. You have to convince the bankers about your business model. Most of the times they are old school guys from New York. They might not understand that pretty well. And when you talk about a SPAC, if the manager of the SPAC understands your business better, it's much easier for you to have a better valuation and going public very quickly, because probably they thought about the route of going public themselves and probably found a lot of difficulties of convincing investors that that is a real business, which in case of a SPAC, again, you only have to convince one person, right? Not a whole market. I think that's the SPAC thing, right? You cut corners. The guy has a blank check to invest anything he wants. If he believes in you, you get it, right? And probably for those guys, which is a very new economy, the very new business, probably a lot of people will not understand about it. And remember, we just came after prices from tech being discounted 50, sometimes even 80%, right? 80% down from the peak in November last year. So you're talking about a market that went down a lot. So the homework that these guys would have to do to go public would be even harder now than it was 1 year ago. Much, much harder. So probably that was the only way they could go to market.
Wow. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think, Ed gives a great overview of what SPAC is, and from that standpoint,
Excellent.
and from how to go about it, and how it's different. I mean, I like what he said. It's SPAC. You're just trying to convince the one investor, so you have pretty much an audience of one. And for us, maybe not as in depth on whole the stock markets and investments. Person that came to my mind, well, here's another TikTok or another the technology of the company. I had never heard of Phase until he posted that article, and I was thinking of all the
Neither have I,
speculation.
is the issue.
Yeah, with GameStop and all the craziness that was going on earlier last year and this year with the stock there, and I'm thinking, yes, they have value, they're making money, but it doesn't seem like there's any there. There's no. And is it lasting? I don't know. Is it like I hate to repeat your pun, but is it just a phase? But I would go back to what Ed said. I think he nailed it. So.
And just, I don't know if you have any time, but just, I have a 5-year-old and I have a 2-year-old at home, right? They don't watch any TV. Right. They only watch YouTubers, kids YouTubers, like their age. They're posting content. And this is the same. They talk to the teenagers. The teenagers don't consume even Netflix. For them is old people's channels as well. Like they want to consume this kind of content, right? And they spend hours and hours seeing people playing the game they love to play, so they can enhance their game. So it's a different world. Like I see my kids, they don't even care about looking into anything that is not on demand.
You could see this in news ratings. Like traditional news ratings have completely fallen off a cliff, and they're being replaced, whether they like it or not, by Substack and YouTubers. That's the only places you can see actually a market increase in that type of content, and the format completely changes. So I don't think that you're seeing any negative trends in that in terms of esports. Esports is going to be on the rise. I was kind of more attacking it from the SPAC angle. This seems like a vehicle that has a terrible track record now, and the types of things that they're elevating, like you were saying, all right, the market is downshifted. This is a non-traditional business model. It would be very hard for them to try and pitch it to a banker, but maybe they needed to pitch it to a banker because it's not a realistic, and they might be successful, but in general, we're seeing, I think, a negative trend for this investment vehicle.
Well, and let's bridge it back to the last article in a way, right? Advanced air mobility, not the acoustic aspect of it, but the fact that you're and Ed, to your point, in the last couple of years, you've seen actually an explosion of SPAC investment money in the advanced air mobility sector, right? So Vertical Flight Society puts out their annual directory of eVTOL aircraft. I mean, I think there are well over 700 different designs. And, that's where some of these folks are getting this money, is through SPAC. And then, of course, through the Air Force and the DoD for some of these like AFWERX, SoftWorks, SIBR type, other transaction authority funding as well.
And that's what it is. Those folks who get those rewards are going to be even more attractive to SPAC investors.
And remember one thing, guys. These guys, they raised the money for SPACs a year ago when the market was booming, and they raised the money. The manager of the SPAC only makes money if he deploys the money and buy other company. So he's very incentivized to buy other companies. So it's the reverse because he raised the money 1 year ago when the market was booming and got the valuation there and raised the money, right? But they only make the money if it deploys. So that's a good moment now because they might pay better valuation because they need to deploy their money to make money. So they were smart. They find that the guys are more incentivized to buy them rather than raising a new money. That money was raised 1 year ago, surely, and the spec guy needs to spend the money within the time frame of 1 to 2 years, depending on the spec thing. So he has probably if you want to spend the money now, he would lose the money, have to give the money back to investors, and not make any money. So again, that's this timing thing.
So yes, and he bought a net positive business, so he's actually doing better than most people in terms of strategy around this stuff.
Yeah, Mike, I think we're at the end of our time here already. I can't believe we're already
we
at the
did.
top of the hour.
We went a little long today, but that's okay. That means we were having good conversations. And in fact, we got another compliment from the chat, Joshua Morales. It's great to hear about MOSA and how it's becoming attractive to AFWorks, other DoD proposal reviewers. So thanks, Joshua. Just want to remind everybody again, if you liked what you heard today, to subscribe, like, and hit the bell on YouTube, or like us anywhere else that you are viewing us. We got a lot of stuff coming up this week. Dawn, do you want to take us out with what everybody can expect to see this week?
Yeah, just real quick. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we're going a little bit later. We're not our normal 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're going to bump that 15 minutes. So dial in at 11:15 Eastern to our Full Tilt. That's Technology Industry Leadership Talks with Cameron Schell, the CEO of Dragonfly. You're going to love to hear some leadership talks from him. Like Ed, a serial entrepreneur. Cam started at the age of 14 with his first products and company. Next, this Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones podcast, we actually have Tony Reed of Drone Cadets doing incredible things in STEM education for underserved communities. This Thursday on Clubhouse, we have Anna Birch from Skydio kicking off our new month of developing industry leaders. And then next Monday on the crew is this podcast, same time, same place. We got Michael Robbins from the Association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. He's their policy guy, and CEO of Modal AI, Chad Sweet, who I did meet, by the way, at the Pix4 Developers Conference. And then next week we'll be on Twitter Spaces on Tuesday, live from an AAM event at the San Francisco airport that UC Berkeley is putting on. And we'll have Yolanka Wolf from the Community Air Mobility Initiative on Twitter with Adam Cohen from Berkeley. So, and hopefully some other folks that are on the way to that conference, and everybody else, to talk more about advanced air mobility. So should be a great lineup this week and next.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited for what we got coming up. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ed. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. We are out here.
Thank you.